Okay, we're going to start again now. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our series on the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. We're learning from the book Keter Shem Tov. We're doing it for 3, 4, 5 sessions already. And tonight we're going to begin, for those who have the book and are following, Lamed Chet. That is where we're starting. Number 38, Lamed Chet. We have many beautiful, deep, profound teachings from the Baal Shem Tov. So here we're going to start. This is relatively short. So it says, Shemati Mimori, I heard from my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, Ki yira chitzonit habala adam hu yad yamino yitbarach. Pshuta sheyitorer ha'adam mizeh le'yira pnimit. So he says this is something that applies to everyone, and it's not the easiest thing to accomplish. Nonetheless, he is encouraging us by saying that when a person feels an outside type of fear, anxiety, stress, whatever we want to call it, but here in Kabbalistic terms, it's gira chitzonit, like an outside. The reason of our fear is something from the outside is happening, and we're afraid of it, or we're in stress because of it. So he says that a person needs to know that this is coming upon them because this is the right hand of God. The right hand of God. In order to cause a person to feel an inner sense of awe and fear of God. So there's two different things. Sometimes this outside fear is called pachad, like real fears, like we're in danger, or we have some kind of a phobia or blockage, and we're really feeling intensely fearful because of this. So we have to know that this is actually God's right hand, which is always associated with chesed, loving kindness. So here we see the Baal Shem, without saying it, is saying something very Kabbalistic, because Yira is the inner dimension of Gevura, and it's always on the left side of the Sirot. Chesed is always on the right side. So the Baal Shem is saying that if you feel Gevura, if you feel judgment, fear, anticipation in a negative way, that's on the left side. But I said, but it's really God's right hand, which is, in a sense, behind the scenes, so that a person will delve deep inside and awaken an inner sense of yira. And that inner sense of yira is a very positive thing. So I'll continue. Ukasher yada adam shezeh chazdo Hashem lorer. So he says, and when a person understands this, that this seemingly negative situation is actually God trying to wake us up in the inner sense. Na'asem yira ahava, and then a person can transform fear into love, severity into kindness. And this happens to everyone. That's why this is such a universal idea is trying to get over, because everyone has moments of great stress, fear, deep anticipation. And what do we do with that? So the Baal Shem Tov is saying if you can transform that outside fear and understand that God is trying to waken us up, trying to actually help us, even though it appears that it's like a negative kind of occurrence. So he continues by saying, Na'aseh miyira ahava, shekablo ba'ahava v'niftar miyira chitzonit. Because then a person can accept these stressful situations, accept them with love, because we realize that God is behind it, and we're supposed to learn something important from this, and we're supposed to change on the inside, and therefore we can free ourselves from outside type of fear and only feel an inside awe of God's presence and his trying to teach us something. So this goes along very well. Something we learned, I think, in the very first class is that when the Baal Shem Tov was approximately 5 years old, his father passed away. And he told him two things on his deathbed. He said, don't fear anything but Hashem, and love every Jew with your whole heart and soul. And the Baal Shem Tov integrated that and lived those teachings his whole life. And I believe I've shared this already, that after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, he came in a dream to one of his students, and he said, why is everyone telling miracle stories about me? Why aren't they talking about the great Yirat Hashem that I had? But this, the Yirat Hashem, is the awe and fear of God. Again, we always are translating fear as being the ultimate respect, the ultimate way that we approach a teacher, a parent, God, with total respect. So that's what the Baal Shem Tov said. But his father said, don't fear anything. And the Baal Shem didn't. He was fearless. He began a whole movement, and there was tremendous opposition. And nothing moved him, but he had an inner sense of fear and awe. Now, there's one further very profound thing here. And I remember in the series we did about the Sfirot that we mentioned that when we look at the Sfirot, so we say Chesed is on the right side, Gevura is on the left side, because we're looking at the Sfirot from our perspective in this direction. But if we imagine that God is behind, as it were, the Sfirot, and he's looking at us, then his right hand is our left hand, and his left hand is our right hand. And this is alluded to in what the Baal Shem Tov is saying. He says, when we feel Gevura, the left side, it's really God's chesed towards us, trying to arouse us, wake us up, and make us look at the situation and reframe it in, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? What is the teaching I'm supposed to receive from this situation that I'm in that is not necessarily, doesn't feel very positive? But if I can see through it, then the Baal Shem Tov says you can take outside fear and awaken inside fear. But again, it's not the fear of being afraid of something. It's Yira means the ultimate perspective of our relationship with an infinite God, and the deep respect that is due to God as a very finite limited being in the light of an infinite, all-knowing God. So that is the first insight. And like I said, it applies to everyone. Everyone goes through difficult situations, sometimes every day. Hopefully not, but we are challenged constantly. Little challenges, a little bit bigger challenges, huge challenges. And the Baal Shem is saying, always look for God's chesed, look for God's lesson or teaching, or how I can grow from this. Okay, the next insight is Mem Aleph, 41, Mem Aleph. And it says like this. Again, Shemati Mimori, I heard from my teacher. Perush Sur Meirav Yaseh Tov. The Baal Shem is going to explain a very, very important concept, which is called turn away from evil and do good. The full verse is Sur Meirav Yaseh Tov, Bakei Shalom V'Radfehu. Turn from evil and do good. Go after peace and pursue it. But a lot of times people just quote the first part, this idea of turn away from evil and do good. And this is brought especially for someone who is, let's say, engulfed in not such good lifestyles or behavior, and now wants to change. So what is the priority? So in this verse, it says the first thing you have to do is turn away from evil, or turn away from the things that you want to distance yourself from, turn away from all those things that you want to move away from, and then you can do good. And like the example is brought, let's say someone goes to the mikveh and they want to purify themselves, but they're holding on, let's say, to a dead mouse. And they go into the mikveh holding this dead mouse. So it's very problematic. How is this person going to become pure? Because they haven't turned away from those things that they want to separate themselves from. So first, Sur Meirav Yaseh Tov. Now here I'm going to add a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov that's not included here, but it's important to know that the Baal Shem Tov, and hopefully we'll get to it at some point in Keter Shem Tov, he says, turn away from evil by doing good. What's the difference? So the Baal Shem Tov is recognizing that sometimes we are addicted to our negative behaviors, in all kinds of addictions, all kinds of behaviors. And so here at first it says, turn away from those things, and then you'll be able to do good. But the Baal Shem Tov is addressing what happens if a person doesn't have the strength. They want to change, but they don't quite have the strength to turn away from certain things yet. So the Baal Shem Tov says, you turn away from evil by starting to do good. And if you start doing good, then it will give you the strength to turn away from those things that you want to. There's no right or wrong here. For some people, it works that you have to turn away from what you want to turn away from, and then you could enter into a new state of consciousness, a new lifestyle, a new way of thinking. But for other people, that's very challenging. And the Baal Shem says, all is not lost. If you can't immediately turn from evil, start by doing good. Start by doing good. Now let's continue with what he says here. But here he just says, Perush sur me'ra v'yaseh tov, the explanation of turning away from evil and doing good. Now he brings something which I have to admit I did not have a chance to find the source for this, but he says that, one second. And by the way, this verse, Sur Me'ra V'yaseh Tov, is from Psalms 34, verse 15. 34:15. So here he says, the Yirmiyahu Hanavi, that Jeremiah the prophet, Ne'anash Masha Hushlach Labor, Ukayotse Lefi Shalohit Palel Al Yisrael B'Sheshama Hanevuah L'Ra'ah Al Yisrael. So this, I have to admit, I was surprised by. He brings, it must be a Midrash or the Gemara, where it's known that Yirmiyahu was thrown into a pit. Like many of the prophets, he was despised by the authorities because of his prophecies. But here it says that Yirmiyahu himself was punished by being thrown into a pit because when he heard one of the heavy prophecies about what would happen to Israel if they didn't change their ways, he didn't pray sufficiently for the people. So like I said, it's a little bit surprising because Jeremiah was cried buckets of tears for the people. But it must be that one particular time he didn't pray sufficiently, and it ended up, he brought upon himself to be thrown in a pit. The Baal Shem continues, Masha Ein Kain Yeshayahu, but not so with Isaiah, Yeshayahu. Shemo Moreh al Yeshua, because his name hints to salvation. Yeshayahu comes from the root of redemption, salvation. V'hadam yachol lafoch chalom o nevuah me'ra l'tova. Now he brings another idea. He is stringing together a number of different ideas. And here he says that a person has the ability to take a dream or a prophecy and turn it from evil into good. He continues, Kamosha ro'eh b'chalom met, yachol lafoch lasot tam. If a person sees in their dream a dead person, the word is met, mem tav. He has the ability to turn those two letters backwards to tav mem, which means innocent, sincere, serious, in a good way. But what he's saying is that a person in dream, prophecy, or life itself, this is very connected to what we just learned, can take a somewhat negative situation and turn it into something good. Because we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. Things are happening to us all the time that are not in our hands to direct or control. But we can control how we think about them and what we do with them. So he brings another example. If to the word sarah, which means trouble, you can turn the same letters into tzohar, which means to shine. So here, by switching the letters, but here, this is very Kabbalistic, what he's doing here. This is what's called the permutation of letters. But he's using it to make a point. And he's saying that Yirmiyahu, if he would have prayed sufficiently, he could have found a way to turn that prophecy into something more positive. And he finished by saying, now he reconnects it with turn away from evil and do good. He says, "V'zeh shekatuv sur me'ra v'aseh tov." He said, and that's what it means to turn away from evil and to do good. The way he is explaining it is, how do you turn away from evil? By turning it into good, which is very connected to what we just learned. This idea that if we're experiencing gevura, that we see that behind it is God's chesed. And then that changes the way that we look at the situation. As I said in the beginning, this is not, it's not easy all the time. But when we can do it, it literally changes our life. Because we all know that when unfortunate, sad, negative, destructive things happen to us, it's very easy to get caught in that and fall into depression and hopelessness. But here the Baal Shem Tov is saying, that's his explanation of turn from evil, but like I said before, by doing good. But here it's a little bit different. Turn from evil by making it something good. And of course, this reminds us of, though he doesn't quote it, of the famous saying by Nachum Ish Gamzu, where he would say, Gamzu Latova. Whatever would happen to him, and actually he lived a very difficult life. If you in the Gemara it explains, but he would always say, this is also for the good. And at one point he was physically in such a drastically compromised physical condition that people like, how can you bear this? And his answer was Gamzu Latova. He understood that that is the one thing in his control. It wasn't in his control that he was in that seemingly terrible situation physically, health-wise. But it was in his control to try to turn it around and say, this is also for the good. Rabbi Akiva, who is the student of Nachum Ish Gamzu, so he said a similar thing where he said, all that God does, he does for the good. And we, like we said, we know that we experience hardships all the time, all over the world. But Rabbi Akiva said, everything that God does ultimately is for the good. So these are very, very essential teachings from the Baal Shem Tov, even though he's using, like in this case, he takes the word for death, met, and he turns it around to tam, innocent, pure, wholehearted, and tsara, which means trouble, into tsohar, shining. So these are, again, he's employing these Kabbalistic ideas, but the teachings are so psychological, emotional, and real, and relevant for each and every one of us. Okay, so here we go to Mem Daled Aleph. Mem Daled Aleph. And it says, Inyan hadvekut bo yitbarach hu al yedei otiyot Torah v'tefillah. So he says, this is a concept we have discussed, the idea of what's called dvekut, clinging to God, unifying with God. So how does one accomplish that? How do we cling to God? So he says, Al Yedei Otiyot Torah v'Tefillah, through the letters of Torah and Tefillah. We remember the book before this that we went through was called Amud Tefillah, and we learned that in depth. And that had very much to do with delving into the letters and words of prayer, and through that to unify ourselves with God. So here it's somewhat of a repetition. Sheyidbak machshavato upnimiuto lepnimiut ruchanit shebetocha otiyot. That a person has to invest their most inner thought and their most inner spiritual sense into the letters of the Torah. In other words, the letters of the Torah themselves are brewing with spirituality, are pregnant with meaning. But if we don't invest our inner spiritual sense into the letters, then we won't get them. It will just pass over us or pass under us. He continues, this is the secret of what it says in Shir Shirim. Besod yishakeni b'neshikot pihu. So this is in the second verse of Shir Shirim. The very second verse, where it says, he kisses me with the kisses of his mouth, and they're sweeter than wine. So the Baal Shem Tov explains this is what's called devekut rucha barucha. This is what's called clinging spirit to spirit. And what he's trying to say is that within the letters of the Torah is spirit, is ruach, is profound spirituality, is godliness. And within a person, there is godliness and spirit and spirituality. So we cling to God by putting those two together. And we draw out our own spirituality by tapping into the spirituality of the letters, and the opposite simultaneously. By tapping into the spirituality of the letters, it awakens our spirituality. And now he gives over a very innovative connection. Ukamosha Shamati Memori, and the person who is recording this said, and I heard from my teacher that this teaching that he's giving over is connected to a verse in the 68th Psalm, verse 14, where the first words are Im tishkavun bein sifatayim. And it's translated, if you lie among the sheep herds. So it sounds like a very physical thing. You're out in the fields and you're lying among the sheep. But if you look at the word that's used here, which is very unique for sheep herd, it's the same word as lips. Sifatayim. Hashem sifatai tiftach ufi agi tilatecha. That's the verse we say right before the Amidah. God, please open my lips so I can tell your praise. And so sifatayim are lips. So the Baal Shem Tov takes a verse that seemingly is about something else altogether, but because the word sifatayim, and if you remember, we learned one of the first things we learned in Keter Shem Tov is every word has at least two different meanings, if not more. So the same root or the same word can mean many different things. And by learning to connect the different meanings, then we get to the profound depths of verses and stories in the Torah. So here he's saying this idea of kiss me with the kisses of your lips. And he says that's the idea of clinging breath to breath, spirit to spirit. And he says that's how we should relate to the letters of the Torah. That it's as when we're totally within the letters of the Torah, we're within the letters of the Tefillah, then we are clinging to Hashem. That's how he began this. How do we cling to Hashem? So he's saying, but through the letters of the Torah and Tefillah, we cling to Hashem, and it's like kissing. As I said before, by our putting our spirit into the letters, and the letters putting their spirit into us, it's like kissing. And so that's how he ends this Torah, by connecting to something we ordinarily wouldn't connect it to. These words, im tishkavun bein sifatayim. Very, very innovative. And I'll take the opportunity to explain that so many of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, already tonight we learned two, the way he took two different verses and he explains them in a way that no one had explained it before. As we've said, he was extremely innovative, very creative, and he saw in the letters and the words of the Torah these multiple meanings and how to connect what may seem to be very different types of ideas or different circumstances, and he'll find connections between them. Now, the next one is Mem Hey. And to be honest, I'm reading something into this, which I think is absolutely fascinating. We can't say that the Baal Shem Tov understood what I'm going to say, because I'm going to connect it to modern technology and the computer, what he's saying here. But I believe he understood something on a very deep level. And this is a teaching I heard from Rav Ginsburg, who says that anytime a new technology, a new theory, a new idea makes its way in the physical world, in society, in science or art or philosophy or whatever it is, that at first will appear in a spiritual teaching that precedes it and actually helps bring it down into the world. So now I'm going to read Mem Hey, and I'm going to tell you what I flashed on what he perhaps is saying here. So he says like this, B'chol ot nichlalu kol ha'otiyot. In every letter is included all of the letters. Now this we've learned many times, what's called inter-inclusion, where all of the sfirot are included in all the other sfirot. And the great example is Sfirat HaOmer, Chesed Sheba Chesed, Gevura Sheba Chesed, Teferet Sheba Chesed. Each sfira is within another sfira. Here he makes a similar statement that each letter includes all the other letters. Ki shoresh kol ha'otiyot hu ot aleph. And now he brings a new idea, and he says, because really the root of all the letters is the letter aleph. Now we'll explain. Hu karov le'achdut ha'ein sof. Why is every letter connected to the aleph? Because the aleph is the first letter, and it's the closest to the infinite light, which is really beyond number. The Ein Sof is infinite. There is no number that can be associated with it. That's why it says in Tikkunei Zohar that God is Chad v'lo bechushban. God is one, but not in the number one. He's one in the reality of total unity, but not as we relate to the number one, like the first of a series. So he says that all the letters included Aleph, because Aleph is the closest to the Ein Sof. V'achar kach nitpashtu, and afterwards the aleph spreads out. Ki od bet hu bet alefin, because what is the letter bet, the second letter of the alphabet? It's actually two alephs. And he continues, ad ot tav, until the last letter, the tav, which has a numerical value of 400. So he says, so the first letter, the second letter is two alephs. The 10th letter, yud, will be 10 alephs. And then he says, in the last letter, tav, which equals 400, he says, daled ma'ot alfin. It's actually 400 alephs. The ot tav hu acharon v'rachok min ma'atzil. And the tav, the last of the letters, is far away from that which creates it, from the first cause, which is the Ein Sof. V'al yedei tzaddik mikarev kol ha'otiyot l'shorshan, and through the tzaddik, the righteous individual, he is able to draw all of the letters back to their shorish. In other words, if we look at an aleph or beit or gimel or daled, it appears to be a finite entity. It's a letter in the alphabet. But since all of the letters are really just strings of alephs, and aleph is the closest to the Ein Sof, so the tzaddik can awaken and return all the letters of the Torah, and through that, every person to their root. Va'az nimtaka din b'shorsho. And in that way, a tzaddik, a righteous person, can sweeten judgments in their source by drawing everything back to the origin of everything, the Ein Sof. So this Torah is connected to the first two Torahs we learned, is that even the Tav, which is the farthest away from the Ein Sof, from the first cause, but if you can see that the Tav is really just aleph, 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 all the ways to 400, then we're getting to the source of everything. And that, through that, we can sweeten judgments. Just like the first Torah we learned tonight, that we can take fear and turn it into love, yira into gevura into chesed, or met into tam. All of these Torahs are sharing a theme, the idea that through our free will, our perspective, our way of looking at things, we can turn sur me'ra v'yaseh tov, turning from evil and doing good, turning from evil by turning the evil into good. Evil here, we just mean negative. It doesn't mean evil per se. It could be, but here it just means negative situations that we can turn into the positive. Now, what I thought of when I read this is this reminds me of how the binary system of a computer, that as complicated as computers are, they, at least till recently, I have to be honest, I'm not up with AI and how it works in a technical sense, or all kinds of new powers behind the computer. But until recently, it was all based on 0 and 1, a binary system. And everything going on in the computer were just strings or relationships between 0 and 1. Here, the Baal Shem Tov is saying everything, all the letters of the Torah, and we know that God created the world through the Torah, the letters of the Torah. And so the Baal Shem is saying all the letters are simply strings of alephs. Aleph is 1. And why does every letter have an aleph? Because it's the closest to the Ein Sof. That's the 0, as it were. It's the 0. So when I read this, I'm just sharing, this is what popped into my mind. It was like, oh my gosh. I couldn't even believe that he was giving over in a spiritual sense. I'm not claiming that he understood that this Torah would pave the way, would bring down a concept into the world. But this is what I learned from Rav Ginsburg, that every innovation in the physical material world begins from the Torah, but begins from a spiritual idea. And so I've heard from Rav Ginsburg a number of times taking different ideas in the Arizal and saying that this is the precedent for a certain scientific idea brought into the world. So to me, it's clear that this is what's happening here. I guess this is my innovation and the Baal Shem Tov's innovation. But I truly think that there's something very, very profound at work here. Okay. Okay, the next one is Mem Zayin, where it says that it's actually based on a Tosfot. A Tosfot is one of the commentaries on the Talmud. The Ve'er Kushit ha-Tosfot, the Perach Tet de Shabbat. It's in the 9th chapter of Shabbat. And what is the question of the Tosfot? Lama hutzrach HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'chapot hahar al Yisrael. And this is a question in the Talmud, and everyone asks to this day. Let me read a little bit further. Ha amru mi'atzman na'aseh v'nishma. Why did God, according to the Midrash, it does not say this in the Torah, it says that Moshe brought the people tachtit hahar, to stand under the mountain, meaning around the mountain. But the Gemara almost takes it literally, that they were standing under the mountain. And the sage says, from this we learn that God held the mountain over their head at Mount Sinai and said, if you receive the Torah today, good. And if not, this will be your burial place. Meaning, I'm going to drop the mountain on you. So everyone asked, how did the sage come up with this? It doesn't say this in the Gemara. It just says that they came to the bottom of the mountain, because God had said no one could climb the mountain. Only Moshe could go up. Everyone had to stay at the bottom of the mountain. And this sage says, from this we learned that God held the mountain over their head. But what's the question? It's just a startling statement. But the question is, the people had already said, Na'aseh v'nishma. The people had already said, we will do and we will understand. God, whatever you tell us to do, even if we don't understand, we'll do it, and then hopefully we'll understand. This is held out to be the ultimate of free will, the ultimate statement of we're choosing to do your will, God, not because you're forcing us. We're choosing Na'aseh v'nishma. So then the question is, why did the sage, and everyone quotes this, that God held the mountain over our head and said, if you receive the Torah today, good. and if not, it will be your burial place. That's the question. Now let's hear what the Baal Shem Tov answers. Perusha Baal Shem Tov. So he says, Lakach kafa kadosh baruch hu al Yisrael har kagagit. So God held the mountain over their heads. Lilamed shegam she'enu choshek l'Torah v'avodat Hashem. The Baal Shem Tov says this is to teach us that even when a person is not motivated, is not on fire, doesn't have the energy to learn Torah and serve God, Mikol Makom Einu Ben Chorim Livatel. Still, he's not permitted to say, I just don't feel like it today. I'm going to skip davening today. The middle of Pesach, I really don't feel like eating matzah another day. I think I'll eat a cracker. So the Baal Shem is saying that the reason that this teaching comes down in the Talmud of holding the mountain over the head is just, he is recognizing that we said Naseh v'nishma. And those who have chosen, we'll call it a traditional or a shomer mitzvot lifestyle of doing the mitzvah, we chose to do it. No one forced, even someone who's born into the most orthodox family has free will to walk away from it anytime they want. So that the fact that we do it is because we choose to do it. But what happens if you don't feel like it? So the Baal Shem says that's this idea that it's good that we said Naseh v'nishma. But even if we don't feel like it, God is, as it were, holding the mountain over our head, saying, do it anyways. Do it anyways. Rak yaseh bal korcho v'yidmeh k'mo shekafu oto. That a person will still, that a person feels like they're doing it for, I don't really feel like davening today, but I'm going to force myself to daven because I think it's the right thing to do. And I want to do the right thing, and I don't want to turn away from the Torah just because I only got 2 hours of sleep last night and I'm in a bad mood. So the mountain over the head is teaching us, if you have to feel forced, so feel forced, but do it. So, and he continues by saying, "V'hu derech tov leish Yisraeli leyemei hakatnut." He says, and this is very good advice for, and I'll make a side comment here. He says, Ish Yisraeli. He doesn't say a Jew. He says an Israeli. Ish Yisraeli, an Israeli. And his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, adopted this. That many times, instead of using the term Yehudi, a Jew, he uses the term Ish Yisraeli. So this is prophetic. This is when hardly any Jews were in Israel. If you asked anyone, do you think in 100 years there'll be like a state of Israel with like 6 million Jews in it, and it will be one of the most powerful and innovative countries in the world? No one would have believed. So here he says, he's calling Ish Yisraeli. It's somewhat prophetic. But he says like this advice of even if you don't feel like it, force yourself to do it. He says this is good for when a person is in what's called days of small-mindedness. These are Kabbalistic terms. The idea of katnut means small-mindedness. Shelo yivatel Talmud me'esek limudo, and that he shouldn't cancel his learning. Avodat Hashem, in his service of God. Gam kashi ein choshek, even if he's not on fire to do these things. Umikol makom aseh ma'aseh, nonetheless, do it. Yes, it won't be your deepest davening today. You won't have the highest kavana. Do it. Shehadibur nikra ma'aseh. L'kach gam shehi b'li kavana yatsa. And he's saying that also a very important point. He says a person's speech is like action. And so we could say, well, davening, I'll put on tefillin today, and but that's it. He said, no, speech is like action. So just like you have to force yourself to do acts, mitzvot that have like a physical manifestation, the same thing with speech. And he says, even if you don't have the proper intent, you still get credit that you, in a sense, forced yourself to do it. This is a very important teaching because we're human beings. And sometimes 100 blessings a day, morning davening, afternoon davening, evening davening. Just the whole day is wrapped up in doing mitzvah. And sometimes we're just not in the mood. So here's his advice: do it anyways. The way, I'm not sure where my wife heard this, but she quotes this all the time, that let's say a person for an extended time, a week, a month, just doesn't have it in their heart to daven, but they do go through the motions anyways. And they feel like zero. It's like, I didn't accomplish anything. And then after a week or a month, whatever it is, you have the best davening. So that's like putting a 1 in front of all the zeros. So until you put the 1, all you have is 0. Once you put a 1, you have, I'm quoting you, you have
Rabbi
10.
Nachman. You're quoting Rabbi Nachman.
Oh, it's from Rabbi
It's in
Nachman.
my coloring book.
Okay, it's from my wife just told me it's from Rabbi Nachman, and she quotes it all the time. Rachel?
Yeah. You want me to close the door?
Yeah, please. So if you put the 1 before and you have 6 zeros, what do you get? 1,000,000. So you would think all of those davenings, like I didn't have kavana, I didn't feel like it, I felt like I accomplished nothing. Not true. Not true, because you kept it going. And this is a teaching from I believe the Zohar, where it says that if you have a fire and you let it die down, as long as you add a couple of branches, you can keep the fire going. But if you let the fire go out and you want to keep it going, you can't. You have to start all over from scratch. And that's much harder. What's harder? Starting a fire from scratch or throwing a couple of branches just to keep it going? So that's also very, very, very connected. Okay, I think that is a good place to stop because the next ones are a little bit longer. But we learned some beautiful teachings from the Baal Shem Tov tonight. And I just want to bless everyone to be able to, almost everything we learned is so practical, is so relevant. And yet, this is the Baal Shem Tov is taking from the depths of what we now call Chassidut, but he was innovating this way of thinking and learning, and how he takes the Kabbalah and integrates it into these lessons. but all of the lessons are translated into real situations in our lives. And so I bless all of us that we can learn to translate these deep teachings and find joy in everything that we do.